Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flexible Fertilizers, Polysulphate's Agronomic and Economic Benefits webinar, presented by ICL. This discussion will explore how Polysulphate and ICL PKpluS deliver flexible, multi-nutrient solutions that replace traditional inputs, improve soil health, and drive yield and ROI across diverse cropping systems. I'm Hillary Wynn, the Custom Content Manager for Meister Media Worldwide, publisher of Crop Life magazine, and I'll be moderating this webinar. This webinar has been approved for 0.5 CEU credit in nutrient management from CCA. To receive credit, you must watch the entire webinar. An attendance notification will be sent out at some point during the webinar, and you must respond to receive the credit. If you respond once the webinar is finished, you will receive an email with the QR code for reporting your credit. You simply scan the QR code and submit it. Please do not close your web browser before the webinar has ended completely, or you will not receive the email with the QR code. This is also for the viewers watching the archived webinar. Now, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers, Tony Dono and Dan Tollefson. Tony is the Agronomy Technical Services Manager for ICL. With over 30 years of experience in the agriculture industry, he has held roles such as Territory Manager, Primary Nutrients, Director of Sales, Liquid Specialty Products, and VP of Sales. Tony has a deep passion and extensive experience in row crop systems and fertility programs in the Eastern Corn Belt. Dan Tollefson is the product lead for Fertilizer Plus at ICL. He possesses in-depth knowledge of ICL's products' technical aspects, benefits, and applications, working across the business to provide comprehensive customer support. Dan brings more than 15 years of experience in the fertilizer industry and has a background in product management and sales, as well as experience farming corn and soybeans in Western Minnesota. At this point, I will turn the webinar over to our speakers. Tony and Dan, welcome.
Thank you, Hillary. We'll go ahead and get started here. Tony Dono, Agronomy Technical Services Manager, and then my counterpart, Dan Tollefson here, and just kind of go through the agenda real quick. We already went through the introductions. The next one will be the topic we'll discuss is what polysulphate and how does it work. Then the next one we'll dive into polysulphate is a naturally and gradual release. We'll kind of describe how that phenomenon works, and then we'll roll into how does polysulphate improve our nitrogen use efficiency and just nutrient use efficiencies as well. From there, we'll lead into what is the impact on the overall soil health using polysulphate in your cropping systems. And then we'll roll right into our final topic in terms of how does it simply work from a logistics standpoint, and why would it be a good fit for fall fertilization. So with that, I'll kick it over to Dan to give us an introduction on what polysulphate is and what makes it different from other fertilizers.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And Tony and I are going to spend, the rest of the time here to answer these questions. And so what it is polysulphate is a natural occurring mineral fertilizer. It's called polyhalite. So a lot of times you'll get the question, what's the difference between polyhalite and polysulphate? And the answer is really nothing. We mine a polyhalite mineral that contains potassium, magnesium, calcium, and sulfur, and two water molecules, but then we market it as polysulphate. So when you hear those two terms, they really can be used interchangeably. Polyhalite is the mineral, and polysulphate is how we market that mineral. There's a lot of unique characteristics that goes into polysulphate. It's naturally soluble, low salt index, low chloride source of potassium. So think of SOP, think of like K-Mag Trio. It is safe to use on chloride-sensitive crops, and it is a neutral pH, which is fairly unique in the fertilizer environment. Tony's going to talk more about how it's proven to increase yields, and then some interesting things on how we're seeing good results with lower application rates than traditional inputs. And so I'm going to start at the beginning. And so what is polysulphate? Where is it made? You can see up on the top right-hand side, it's a picture of the United Kingdom, and that gold star is Bulby. And so our mine is at Bulby. It's kind of in between London and Edinburgh, Scotland, right on the coast of the North Sea. And so it is mined traditionally like a potash or, again, K-Mag Trio would be mined. If you could look right below that picture, you'll see a picture of a miner. And what that does, and this is 4,000 feet below the surface of the earth, approximately 6 miles out underneath the North Sea. So we mine that ore body. And what this miner does is it essentially scrapes the walls and takes that mineral, and then we transport it to the mine shaft where it's brought up, crushed, screened, and shipped as fertilizer. Polysulphate is really hard. It's approximately the same hardness as copper is. So it's a very hard mineral, and that machine that you see, that miner on the bottom right, is a very violent and impressive piece of machinery if you get the opportunity to see it. Just some of the history of the mine, I guess. The deposits were found in 1939. A way a lot of products are found is digging for oil. And so geologists would set probes down, and what they found was a high seam of KCl and then a lot of polyhalite. And so from 1974 to 2018, this mine mined potash, MOP. And then from 2011 until today, it's polysulphate. And so from 2018 to today, it's been a 100% polysulphate mine. Like I said, it's about 4,100 feet below the surface of the earth. So it's a deep mine. And the structure, the mineral, is incredibly old. It's about 250 million years old. And if anyone has young kids, Tyrannosaurus rexes were around about 70 million years ago. So this is 250 million years old. It's been there for a long time. And so there's no expiration date on it. It's not going to spoil in your bin or anything like that. So just a little bit of background on what Bulby is and how we ship it. And since it is right on the North Sea, we ship vessels out of Teesport, and we go all over the world. We sell it in 6 to 7 continents on Earth, North America obviously being one of them. So some properties that I do want to discuss, and we're just figuring, just updated this slide. And so one of the interesting things about polysulphate is when you mine it, you get essentially a 1-to-1 product to ore ratio. What that means is for every ton that you bring up the mine shaft, you get a ton of product. That's very unique. Usually with like an MOP, you're looking at a 1 to 1.7 or a 1 to 3, depending on the efficiency of the mine. But polysulphate, essentially you lose some dust, but there's no big tailings piles. It's a pure 1-to-1 product to ore ratio. And due to that, our carbon footprint is very, very low. There's no chemical processing that goes into it. It's simply mined, crushed, sized, and shipped. So to break this down, the 0.0036 kilograms per carbon dioxide equivalent equates to about 15 pounds per ton, per short ton, which is incredibly low. And actually, if this graph was to scale, it would just be a sliver that we probably wouldn't see. If you have a 1-to-1 ratio on this, for example, that's 1 ton of CO2 for 1 product ton. So you break that out, we're looking at about 15 pounds, which is very low. And as we know, we're hearing more and more about carbon footprints in the ag industry. Polysulphate is the lowest fertilizer when it comes to a carbon footprint on the market today. So what does it look like? Here we have 2 samples. On the left is our granular sample. And I've often explained that granular looks just like potash. It's a natural crystal. It's rigid like potash is, like a K-Mag would be. And then we also have standard or minis that are just a natural price, part of the mining process. And from that, we use that product and we put it into T&O markets across the world. We take standard, we can make it into premium in a product called PKpluS, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. But polyhalite, again, has potassium, magnesium, calcium, and sulfur in it. It also has trace elements such as boron. We don't put this on our label because it varies depending on the ore that you're mining. And so what we'll see is anywhere from 200 to 500 parts per million. So it's very minimal. It's 0.02 to 0.05% boron, and that varies. So it's not anything consistent that we could put on the label, but it does have some trace elements. So there's a little bit of boron in there as well. Couple of highlights here, I guess. Just the big things to consider is low chloride. So it's approved for sensitive crops. It has a neutral pH. It's a low carbon footprint. And one thing too that I haven't mentioned yet, it does have OMRI certification. So you can use polysulfate on organic cropping systems. The reason we can do that is because, one, there's no chemical processing that goes with it. Two, it is simply a mined mineral. It's sized. And three, we don't need to put a petroleum-based dedust oil on it. It is, we do put a kind of like a vegetable oil on it that is OMRI certified. So both premium and granular polysulfate is approved for organic cropping systems. I feel like I'm blowing through these, but we've got time for questions at the end. And so I want to talk about what is PKpluS. PKpluS is a product that we make from phos rock, sulfuric acid, phosphoric acid, polysulfate. We can add MOP, SOP to this product too. So we can kind of come up with a customizable 5-in-1 nutrient fertilizer. This is going to have to go through a granulation process. So if you look at the structure of PKpluS, it looks a lot more like phosphates or, it's round like urea, but it looks a lot like phosphates. And so premium also looks like this, but we can kind of tailor-made to your market. And so we've just introduced this into the North American market. As of now, it's been focused mostly on air seeder markets, but with the availability of the P2O5, the cost of phosphates these days, we are seeing some broadcast applications, positioning it for fall application in the broadcast market in the U.S. So there's a lot of flexibility with this. Just like polysulfate, we've seen air seeder applications, broadcast applications, just like you would typical fertilizer. And so this is the analysis, just as an example, 25% P2O5, 8% potassium, calcium at 12.5, magnesium at 1.6, and sulfur at 7.5. So again, that is relatively customizable just due to your raw materials that you use to produce this product. But we don't offer, and every customer different ones. We're in the process of looking at geographies and figuring out what analysis works best for that. But so this is just an example, but those numbers can move depending on the raw materials that you put into the granulation system. So that was a lot. I understand that. I'm going to pass it over to Tony. And Tony, can you help us understand just the release curves of polysulfate and how it works in the field?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, polysulfate is a very unique mineral that we mine. And so it doesn't break down in the soil like your traditional MAP, potash, urea, those types of things would break down. Typically, what happens in the soil is the polysulfate will absorb the water and moisture in the soil, and it kind of releases from the inside out. So traditional fertilizer breaks down and is mineralized from the outside in based off of the environmental factors that go on within the soil. But with polysulfate, it's the exact opposite. And it's a very slow release or very gradual dissolution of that granular product there. The nice thing about this product, when you do apply it, it takes close to about 50 days based off our research for it to fully break down. And I'll show you some agronomic benefits to that, especially on some soybean work that we've done, and how that natural curve fits when the soybean plant needs sulfur during the growing season of things. So we'll just kind of jump right into this. Again, as we mentioned, polyhalite is a mineral. And so this is kind of the makeup of it. It is not a mixture of salts. A lot of commercial fertilizers today that we use go through some kind of process, some kind of reaction in order for them to be produced. With polysulfate or polyhalite, we basically mine it, crush it, sort it, and ship it. And so there is no real, chemical reaction or any manufacturing process that we go through. So this kind of gives you the overall makeup of what the polyhalite mineral looks like. So this is that you're talking about in comparison to ammonium sulfate, sulfate of potash, and magnesium sulfate there. So you'll see there with ammonium sulfate, that kind of dark green or darker curve there on the left of the yellow ones, within about 5 to 6 days, you're already starting to get to about 100% release of the sulfur content within ammonium sulfate. And in the next slide, I'll kind of show you the amount of water it takes to break down each of those various products and things. And then the gray curve is the sulfate of potash, which is a 0062. And then the green curve is the magnesium sulfate that we talked about. And you can just kind of see, over time how that sulfur release is just more gradual, more prolonged, versus some of the competitive products that are out there in the marketplace today. So this is that graph that I was talking. We were talking about the graph, and this is the chart that we used. So you look at calcium nitrate and calcium chloride. One of the lack of benefits you have with these particular two products is you can see there in the far right, water needed to dissolve about 1 pound of those products is very, very low. So it doesn't take a whole lot of product or a whole lot of water to leach calcium nitrate or calcium chloride down deeper into the soil profile, away from the root systems, to where the plant needs it in the timing that it needs it. Polysulfate takes approximately 6 gallons of water per 1 pound of product in order for it to start that whole release curve and starting to release out the sulfur content. And then we got the other extreme of the curve here. You look at calcium sulfate gypsum, that I'm sure everybody's very, very familiar with, or even calcium carbonate, which is your traditional ag lime and limes that we put out on our fields. You look at, you need close to 60 pounds of water, or 60 gallons of water to dissolve 1 pound of gypsum. Whereas with the lime products, calcium carbonate products, you're close to 8,700, almost 8,800 gallons of water to be able to dissolve that 1 pound of lime. So again, those two products, very, very inefficient when you look at what they need, the resources they need in order for them to more efficiently feed the crop in the time that you would need it to execute during the growing season. So again, this is just another graph kind of showing you. This is the one I mentioned earlier about the soybeans. You can see there on number 3, labeled number 3, that's kind of the sulfur uptake by the soybean crop and the timing associated with it. In number 1, kind of the darker colored one, that is sulfate release from ammonium sulfate or from SOP. And you can see that it's close to its useful life in delivering the sulfur that's needed by the soybean crop. Whereas that yellow bar, that yellow line in the number 2, you can see it's more closely related to when the soybean crop needs to be able to take up the sulfur during the growing season, and to utilize that nutrient to be able to finish out and put yield on that crop. And then the final one is number 4. That's your gypsum. You can see where, it just takes very little available in the right time that the crop would need it. And in the next slide, we'll kind of go further into some of the soil breakdown and what's available over the course of the season.
And Tony, I think if you just go back to that slide for just a second, one of the things that we've found with polysulfate is, depending on the geography where we're in, you get different benefits. One of the things that sticks out to me on gypsum is, spoke with a lot of growers that rent their land, and if they're unsure, especially with today's economics for farming, you might not have that land next year. And if you're only getting 17% of your nutrients released in the first 80 days, you're essentially paying for, or could be paying for, that next farmer and giving him some sulfur and calcium. So one of the things that we do see is additional sales, and the benefit of polysulfate is you get all of that nutrient released in that growing season. And if you're renting, that can be a big deal.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And that leads perfectly into kind of this chart here. You can see polysulfate on the left, KCl, SOP on the right. The light blue bar in this bar graph kind of shows you the amount of sulfur, then potassium that's taken up by the plant. You can kind of see about 60% is taken up by the plant. In the yellow there, that's the amount of nutrients left in the soil. So you can see there's about 30% of that is left in the soil, and then you got 10% of polysulfate that's leached out. In comparison to KCl and SOP, you've only got about 45% of those two products that are taken up by the plant during the season. You got a very minimal amount, about 10%, that's left in the soil. And then you've got a very large percentage, or almost a little over half of 55% of that product that you've applied during that season that's leached out of the soil profile. So again, it just shows you the overall efficiencies of using polysulfate versus some of the competitive products that are out there in the marketplace. And in today's economics, I think that's key, that we're really gaining as much efficiencies as we possibly can, because as growers, you are a manufacturer. You're just a manufacturer of corn and beans and wheat or other crops. And so we've got to be super efficient with our raw materials, just like a manufacturer would. So how does polysulfate improve our overall nitrogen use and efficiency? So polysulfate, the sulfur content is in sulfate form. In fact, all 4 nutrients contained in polysulfate are in the sulfate form. So they're in the most efficient and the best form for the plant to take it up during the growing season. And being in that sulfate form, it helps the nitrogen be taken up by the plant more efficiently, reduces any loss potentially that could be occurring during the growing season. And really, there's that synergy between nitrogen and sulfur. And the more available sulfur you have for that nitrogen, the more the plant can efficiently take it up and utilize it during that growing season, thus allowing that nitrogen to turn into proteins and just really drive yield into that plant. So this is just showing you the number of trials that we have across the globe. So we've got a total of 884 trials, not including the ones that we have going this year. I know we have several trials between myself and my two colleagues, Christy Phelan and AJ. So, you know, we've got more trials coming, but you can just see the overall yield effects on those trials. You know, you're averaging about 148 with about an increase of 8%. And then, you know, for some of the nitrogen use efficiency trials that we've had 106 with an average increase on those trials of about 10%. So again, every little bit of efficiencies that we can gain just makes you that more productive and that more efficient as a manufacturer or a producer. So nutrient use efficiencies from polysulfate. This slide is particularly focused on nitrogen and phosphate efficiencies with polysulfate. You can see here in the box with our control, the wheat plants that we have versus the polyhalite polysulfate product. You could just see the overall root structure there on the polyhalite side, just being more robust, more fibrous, more roots to be able to take more nutrients into the plant. And you just see that the plant is farther ahead from a maturity standpoint, broader leaves and things, again, to be able to take in more sunlight and create photosynthesis, which drives additional foods within the plant. You can see through on the little box there, the P uptake improved both years in this study by over 41% and 34% respectively between nitrogen and phosphates, or year to year, excuse me. And then over on the other, you know, we saw a 36% improvement on the nitrogen use over the control. So the darker bars there are the treated, the treated products with polysulfate, and then the controls are the lighters, and you can just see the overall efficiencies from a nitrogen use perspective there. So again, we just focused on the nutrient efficiencies here in terms of cutting the overall nitrogen rates. Again, the more sulfur you can make readily available for that, the more efficient that plant can utilize ammonia, UAN, urea. But what this slide is showing is just the overall optimization that we have from the yield perspective and also the protein analysis with less in. So you can see that you know, that we're driving more nutrients into that plant, utilizing those nutrients more efficiently by having more sulfur readily available to be able to drive that nitrogen into that plant. And so why does polysulfate improve the overall nitrogen uptake? You know, again, the fact that we've got 4 different nutrients combined in one granular is what is so unique about this product. You know, if you think about world-class athletes, you know, what do they do? What are they focused on? They're all focused on nutrition. They're all focused on taking care of their bodies. A plant is no different than a world-class athlete. We've got to feed it the right way with the right balance of nutrients at the right times, in order to drive efficiencies and to drive optimal performance within that athlete. A plant is no different. The fact that we have these 4 different nutrients, calcium, magnesium, sulfate, or sulfur and potassium, helps balance that nutrition within that plant, that helps the overall health of that plant and to better utilize the nutrients more efficiently. You know, without potassium and calcium, that plant really struggles to be able to take up nitrogen efficiently and utilize it in the most effective way possible. The more that plant struggles, the more yield we take away from that plant. So the calmer we can keep that plant, the more relaxed we keep it, the more efficient it can be, the more yield that we can drive into that plant than if it's in a high stress environment. So again, if we can just feed it the right way, we're going to be able to help drive efficiencies and yield into that plant. And calcium is needed for, that continuously through grain fill in order to help finish it out. So that way we can pack on as much yield as we possibly can and as much weight as we possibly can into that kernel and into that fruit. So, a lot of the calcium sources that we use today are not readily available, or we've had difficulty mixing it in. So a lot of growers shy away from this, from using calcium, just because of the challenges of using it. Whereas now with polysulfate, we have a calcium source that's very easy to use. You can blend it with NPKs, and you can get it out there in a very efficient manner to be able to drive yield into that grain. So what is the impact of polysulfate on salt index, soil structure, and long-term soil health? With polysulfate being such a low salt product, it's very, very safe for sensitive crops. I know talking with a lot of growers today through regenerative ag and just being very, very conscious of our overall soil health and driving efficiencies into there. A lot of growers are being very conscious of how much chlorides or salts are they putting into their soils. You think about, you pour salt water onto an earthworm, and what does that do? It sucks the moisture out of that earthworm. And so it's kind of the same thing. If you get too much salts into your soils, you don't have the ability for that soil to work efficiently in gathering up that water and holding what it needs and when it needs it. It just kind of tightens things up. So by introducing calcium, magnesium into our soils, it helps the overall structure. Again, it just helps with infiltration. It helps with root health, helps with the overall nutrient uptake as well. And as I mentioned, we want to make sure that we're trying to keep our soils as healthy as possible, and reduce that salt content so it just doesn't bind it up and cause it to not be able to absorb that water and hold that water for when the crop needs it. So in this slide just kind of gives you a visual of where polysulfate is from the overall salt content versus others. So you've got muriate of potash there on the very left. And then you've got NOP and mag sulfate, and then sulfate of potash, SOP there. And again, polysulfate has an extremely low chloride content, salt content. So it's great, as we mentioned, for any very, very sensitive crops out there, any of your specialty crops. And with the low salt index, we have a neutral pH. So we're not driving any fluctuations within our pHs in our soil. And in the next slide, we'll kind of show you that. One of our customers, Taurus in Canada, one of their employees, Mike Delinsky, took this picture. It just kind of shows you the root tip of canola and how it interacts with the overall polysulfate granule. You can see, just because of the low salt content, we're still able to get those fibrous roots to continue to grow on the main root, which helps again with the uptake of nutrients and things. So just a great visual representation of how safe polysulfate is for the root systems and things. And then this next picture, again, is pea roots. Again, this was taken by Mike with Taurus. It just drives home the point. All those fibrous roots, hairs, and things, and that interaction with the polysulfate granular, and you don't see any of the burn. You don't see any bald spots there on the main root, because it's just such a safe product to utilize in your cropping systems. So more efficient nutrient use source, polysulfate is, it's a 4-in-1 multi-nutrient product. It helps mitigate salinity and chloride stress. With the lower chloride, potassium, it's safe for sensitive crops and soils compared to KCl. It delivers more nutrients than versus gypsum. So it just is a more efficient product versus some of the competitive products that are out there. And then there's just a tremendous amount of soil health benefits associated with it through improved structure, just water infiltration. And then I think one of the biggest keys is by reducing the overall salt content within that in that soil. It helps for the delivery of our nutrients and things. So this just kind of shows you some of the economics and the returns by utilizing polysulfate versus a gypsum. So this is in a higher yield environment and lower rates on some peanuts. So you see 1,000 pounds to the acre of gypsum in the dark blue, or the bars on the left, and then in the lighter blue, those are 100 pounds to the acre of polysulfate. So there was no real statistical difference in the overall yields and in things in these treatments. What we were looking at was just the overall economics associated with that. And with the fluctuation of prices and things out there, we just kind of wanted to highlight just kind of graphically what that looks like. You could get some prices and start doing that calculation from an ROI perspective. But, at the end of the day, polysulfate is just a more efficient and beneficial nutrient versus a product like gypsum. So this study here was one of my colleagues, AJ's studies done in 2024 on some rice in Tennessee and at the University of Missouri. So this is looking at reducing the overall K rate with polysulfate. You can see there the first cluster of bars is in Missouri. The second is in Tennessee, and then the third set there on the right is the overall mean, which is the average of those two studies. And you can see in the first treatment, he took muriate of potash 060 at 150 pounds per acre. That was the grower standard. And you can see that the yield was about 148 bushels to the acre, delivering about 90 pounds of K2O per acre. And then the next treatment number 2 was just straight polysulfate at 200 pounds to the acre. Again, lower rate of K2O on a pounds per acre basis, but the yield was significantly higher than the grower standard there. We're just adding the potash. You can see the overall improvement from a gross income on a per acre basis as well. And then what AJ did here is he ran the same 200 pounds of polysulfate to the acre. He reduced and he added MOP, or he reduced the MOP down to 75 pounds per acre. We were able to get 75 pounds of K2O per acre. So we increased that overall efficiency from just using polysulfate. And then, you see a yield boost of about 5 bushel per acre versus the straight polysulfate. And about 12 bushels to the acre versus the straight 0060 or muriate of potash. Again, deriving considerably more gross income on a per acre basis versus the individual treatments there in treatment 1 and treatment 2. Here's another study in 2024 on some corn, again, focused on reducing K rate with polysulfate. We overall with these studies, we saw about a 3.5% yield increase over the grower standard. So there in treatment 1 is the grower standard. We ran 133 pounds to the acre. Again, still delivered the same 90 pounds of K2O on a per acre basis. Tare weight was around 59 pounds per bushel with a yield on a per acre basis of 163. So we reduced the MOP. We added polysulfate into this into treatment 2 at 200 pounds to the acre, and we ran 67 pounds to the acre of area of potash. So we delivered 68 pounds to the acre of K2O. Tare weight, slight increase on a per bushel basis of 59.33, and just a little bit of a yield bump. Went from 165 versus a grower standard of 163. So when we ran just polysulphate by itself, again, delivered the same pounds per acre of K2O, 28 as in previous study. Saw another slight increase in the overall tare weight versus the previous two treatments, and then saw about a 4 bushel per acre yield response versus treatment number 2, and about a 6 bushel yield response versus treatment the first treatment. And then the final treatment, we took polysulphate at 200 pounds to the acre. We added in a product, a couple products of ours. They're water-soluble products, Flow at 3 pounds to the acre, and Pulse at 0.5 pound to the acre. Both products are foliar applied. And again, we delivered the same K2O on a pounds per acre basis as straight polysulphate. Saw a slight bump in the overall tare weight on a pounds per bushel perspective, and then saw another yield increase there. What we're learning with combining a polysulphate and with our Flow and Pulse foliar products, there's some synergies between these three products. We combine Flow and Pulse into a tank mix, whether it's with a herbicide application, a fungicide application. In this particular one, we went out straight by itself. But there is a synergy with the nutritionals within Flow and Pulse, with the polysulphate and the sulfur and the mag combination within that combination of products there. So again, just showing you the efficiencies of polysulphate by reducing some of your other nutrients in any of the cropping systems and fertility programs that you have today. This is a slide showing you fall applied polysulphate on corn, and just how it the slow release and how it helps with overall sulfur levels and yields. So you've got the grower standards there, practices. So the light blue or grayish one there on the left under the grower standards, that's fall applied 5 pounds of sulfur per acre. And then the next one, kind of a grayer, that's fall applied sulfur at 15 pounds of sulfur per acre. And so you kind of can see, and then the light blue is spring applied 5 pounds of sulfur per acre. And then the darker blue is spring applied 15 pounds of sulfur per acre. So we just looked at it, we just put out the rates in terms of those various things focused on the sulfur content pounds per acre. And you can see how the grower standard practice versus the same rates, same application timings versus polysulphate. Again, polysulphate proving to be a more efficient fertility program and product, whether it's spring applied or fall applied versus the grower standard there. So Dan, how does having a product like polysulphate simplify the logistics for retailers and farmers?
Yeah, we get that question quite a bit, Tony. We field the question, where does polysulphate fit? And I like to say, well, where doesn't it fit? You have a 4-in-1 nutrient product that is proven to be successful on commodity crops like corn and soybeans. You have a low chloride fertilizer that's approved to use and very beneficial on chloride sensitive crops. And you also have a fertilizer that can be used on organic fields. So using this or using polysulphate, it's so flexible that it does simplify the process for retailers and farmers. And like I said earlier, a lot of it depends on where in the country you are. I mean, if you looked at the if you recall the chart that Tony showed on 1,000 pounds of gypsum per acre versus 100 pounds of polysulfate per acre, that creates extreme efficiencies right there. So that can be a replacement. We do have retailers that have gotten rid of ammonium sulfate and they use polysulfate. And then they go to just like a single source of nitrogen. And so with poly, you get those 4 nutrients. They all work together. And then you focus on just your single source, whether it's urea or ammonia, whatever it is for nitrogen, you can do that. So it is flexible and it can be used. There isn't a cropping system that you can't use polysulfate on. And so by putting it into your bin, it gives you an all-in-one fertilizer that can be used on all crops. So once our retention rate with polysulfate is incredibly high. And I say it's well over 90%. If you buy it 1 year, or if you bring it into your retail facility 1 year, you're going to do it the next year and the year after that. And each year it seems to be getting bigger. So we're seeing rapid growth in the North American market. It's relatively new, so that's to be expected, but just the feedback we've received when people use polysulfate, they come back for more in future years. And so just fall fertility logistic benefits, again, it frees up a bin space. It's flexible. You can use it on all crop types, cover more acres. So instead of 1,000 pounds of gypsum, it's 100 pounds of poly. Timing, it's a good source of sulfur applied in the fall. We say fall applied, spring approved is what we say a lot. And so that fits. It's compatible with all blends. So you can blend it with, your NPK is just like you would any other fertilizer. So there's no limitations there. And then as Tony had said, it does support better soil structure and root health. And frankly, that gets to higher yields and more profitability. Let's see. And then just 2 more slides, I think, until we move to the Q&A. But again, why is polysulfate good fit for fall applications? It really gets back to that gradual release of nutrients. And it's just not sulfur. Like the mag in polysulfate also releases slower, as does potassium and calcium. So that's a gradual release of all 4 nutrients. And due to that, it fits and it works really well in fall applied processes. And that can be broadcast. It can be, well, mostly broadcast, I guess, in the fall. But we've seen some really good success, and it really gets down to the release of nutrients. And so just a quick one here on looking at sulfur and other fall applied sources, sulfur sources. Polysulfate is a good fit because it has a low salt index and it's a gradual sustained release. Ammonium sulfate, you apply that in the fall, you're likely going to have a lot of leaching. That really takes away from your ROI. And then with elemental sulfur, that can break down over years. So it's really unpredictable. And again, gets back to the point, if you're renting land, do you really want to pay for the sulfur for the next farmer if in that situation? But overall, polysulfate seems to be the best fit.
Hey, Dan, I think we've got quite a few questions. Why don't we go ahead and just move into the Q&A session and so that way we can kind of answer those questions that they may have.
Yeah, we do have quite a few questions. But just as a reminder for those who responded to the attendance notification for the CEU credit, please do not close your browser before the webinar has completely ended, or you will not receive the email with the QR code. So with that, let's just dive into the questions. All right. What is your opinion of the release curve? Is that 50 days in the lab or is it longer in the field?
So the 50 days was based off of some field trials and things like that. In the lab, obviously it's a controlled environment. I think we can get it to go longer than that. certainly there's going to be some environmental conditions that may shorten that a period of time, but on average, what we're seeing is about a 50-day release curve in the field.
How do you see the farmer's agronomy changing with implementing polysulfate versus what they are using today?
I think for that, what we see in the field is, you might, if you're using polysulfate in your fertility strategy, you probably replace some other fertilizers. So maybe you don't use ammonium sulfate or gypsum doesn't become a part, or you can delay gypsum application. So from a farmer perspective, I think it gives you more flexibility, obviously, longer nutrients stay in the soil structure for longer, but it's not a huge change. Frankly, it's a really good fertilizer. You're obviously going to replace something for most of the time anyways, but they're not going to see a big change in a polysulfate from a workload perspective. They're not going to see much of a difference, but yeah, I mean, the big change is you're probably going to replace an ammonium sulfate or an SOP or an MOP type of product.
On what soil types were these tests done? Leaching percentage will most likely be different for sand and clay soils.
That is a good question. I have to go back and into those studies and look at the overall soil types. Right off the top of my head, I don't have that information in front of me. So I'd be more than happy to follow up with the person that asked that question at a later date and get that information. But correct. I mean, in the lighter soils, obviously you have less structure to be able to adhere to versus some of your heavier clays and other things. But I will get that additional information for those particular studies so that we can share that with them.
And that's a good point. I mean, we do have all of our studies published on our website. So, go to, ICL Growing Solutions, and you can find these, or reach out to your local TSM or agronomy manager, and be more than happy to share any of these results.
How does, or what is the mechanism for polysulfate to mitigate soil salinity?
Well, it certainly doesn't add to it because of the low salt content. Overall, in terms of breaking down or reducing what's already there, over time as the soil kind of goes through its changes and things, and during the growing season, you're going to start to break down some of that soil. What polysulfate does is it keeps it from adding additional chloride or additional salt to the soil profile when you introduce it into your cropping systems.
Is there a large ore deposit at your mine site in England for the fertilizer source supply to last a long time?
Yes, they're constantly finding additional veins that they can mine, but it has enough. We mine about 1 million tons a year. I think we've got well over 100 years at that rate of ore reserves or more. Comes down to mineral rights, but yeah, there's enough polyhalite reserves underneath the North Sea to last for our lifetime, our kids' lifetime, kids' and it's a lot down there.
Will there be a storage distribution warehouse located in the Pacific Northwest to supply markets?
Another really good question. We do have some third-party retailers that we have space with right now that we can sell the state of Washington. We've got warehousing in California, and we're constantly looking for new places to store this product. As I said, it's fast growing, and so as you grow in volume, you also expand your logistical network. So again, the P&W, we've got warehousing in Washington State and then in California. And we do have rail accessibility. We can ship rail out of St. Louis, Houston, the East Coast markets out of like Wilmington and Chesapeake. So we've got warehouses scattered throughout the country. We do have multiple rail assets that we can ship out of. And so if you want any specifics, again, reach out to Tony and I, or talk to your TSM, and we'll get you the product.
Have you trialed polysulfate on apples to have an adequate database to evaluate?
So yes, we do have some studies on apples, and we do have some studies this year utilizing polysulfate in conjunction with some of our other foliar-based products as well. We, again, like Dan said, our studies are out on our website. So I know we have just a few, and we're building on that at this point in time. So we hope to have more in the future.
Did I hear that right, that polysulfate is organically approved?
Correct.
That's correct. Yep. It is. It's a natural crystal that's simply sized and shipped, and we don't put petroleum dedust oil or coating on it. It's more, again, think of it like more of a vegetable type oil, just for dust suppressant. But it is it's as natural as it comes. It's just a simple mineral that's mined and sized, so it is OMRI certified.
Do you offer coated calcium polysulfate to avert potassium in surface water channels / rivers?
Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Do you offer a coated calcium polysulfate to avert P in surface water channels / rivers?
No, not at this time. I mean, we're always looking for new product ideas, but at this time we don't have a product like that.
Is this polysulfate water soluble, or does it just gradually solubilize over time in soil?
It gradually solubilizes over time in the soil. It is not water soluble. We are working on a liquids suspension product using our polysulfate standard product, which is the equivalent of like the dust product. But no, it is not a water soluble product.
Could polysulfate be used to replace AMS and adjuvant blends to increase herbicide activity?
That is a really good question, and maybe a good research topic for us with our suspension product. But at this time, no, it will not. Your traditional 8009 AMS type products used for chemistry. We do not have any information on that, but I would not recommend using it at this time. No.
All right, that looks like it is all the questions. So I would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I especially want to thank ICL for presenting it. And a special thanks to our speakers, Tony and Dan, for providing valuable information about how polysulfate and ICL PKpluS offer agronomic, logistical, and economic advantages as versatile sulfur-based fertilizers that enhance soil health, simplify operations, and support crop performance. If you want to watch this webinar on demand or revisit certain parts, it will be archived and available at the same link you used to access it today. You will also receive an email reminder of the archive with the link tomorrow. Thank you again for joining us. This concludes the webinar.